Hello and welcome back to another Zombicide painting tutorial. This time I'll be showing you how you can paint your Zombicide Black Plague fatties using the Army Painter's range of paints. Now, as you can see here, I've opted to use more of a natural skin colour tone. Now this miniature has actually been modelled entirely on the fatty that can be found on the box art for the Zombicide Black Plague. Now, as you can see, the miniature has already been primed, and I've used the Army Painter's Barbarian Flesh Spray Primer to do this, because most of the skin areas will be this basing with this colour, so it's quite a nice colour to start off with. Now, before spray priming, I made sure to clean the miniature with some warm soapy water, just to remove any release agent that could be left on the miniature. Now, the first paint that I'll be using to paint this miniature is Abomination Gore, and I'll be using this along the hood and the cowl there, and also the trousers as well. For this step, I'm using my regiment brush, and this is great because it's small enough to give me some control over the brush, but also large enough to allow me to get some nice quick coverage over the miniature. Now I'm using 2 thin down coats as opposed to 1 thick coat, so this will give me the best coverage possible. Once the base coat has been applied for the red areas, we can now paint the rest of the top and also the tabard at the bottom there as well. We're painting all of these areas with Elf Green. As before, I'm using my regiment brush to paint on this particular layer. Just being very careful not to overspill onto either any of the skin areas or the red areas that we've painted in the previous step. Now I've mixed in a small amount of water in with this just to improve the coverage, and I'll be doing a second step once this has dried. The next step is to paint the glove, the pouch and also the satchel on the back there, and we're painting these areas with Necromancer Cloak. Now, as the areas we'll be painting next are slightly small, I've used my character brush instead. I'm just going to be extremely careful when painting this pouch not to overspill onto the areas that we've painted already. And just to get a nice and even coverage, I'll be painting 2 layers instead of just the 1. For the next step, we'll now be painting the hair, the strap around the rope strap around the waist there as well, and also the handle on the axe. Painting all of these areas with leather brown. So for this step, I'm using my character brush as I require a little bit more control when painting these areas, as I don't want to overspill onto the areas that we've already painted. The next step is to paint the axe blade, as you can see there just on the bottom, and also the buckle on the satchel as well. We're painting all of these areas with the claymore blade. Now, using my regiment brush, I'm going to be extremely careful not to overspill onto the areas we've already painted, as it can be quite difficult to remove the silver paint from those areas. So now that we have established all of the base layers, the next step is to apply some shading. And for this we'll be using the Zombie shader. Now, this is from the Zombicide original paint set, not the Black Plague one. And we're applying this wash over the entirety of the miniature. For this step we don't have to be worried about being too neat, so I'm using my monster brush here. I'm just going to be applying the wash over the entirety of the miniature. Just making sure I get into all of the recesses like so. And I've mixed in a small amount of water here just to improve the flow slightly. And I'll probably be doing a couple of washes over the areas as well. So once the wash has dried, we can now start on the highlights. So I'm highlighting the red areas first, and for this we'll be using a 50-50 mix of Zombie Skin and Abomination Gore. So for this step I'm using my character brush again. I'll just be focusing this highlight on the upper edges of the folds on the red areas like so. Just being very careful just to not overspill onto any other areas that aren't red. The next step is to highlight the edges of the green areas of the fabric with a plague skin. Once again, using my character brush, I'll just be focusing this highlight onto the very edges of the green cloth like so. Just picking out the sections where the light would be. The next area we'll be painting is the skin, and for this we'll be highlighting it with a 50-50 mix of Survivor Skin and also Brain Matter Beige. For this step I'll be focusing my highlights onto the edges of the skin, just the raised sections like so. Just making sure I do the same technique across all of the skin areas, including the stomach, the hand and also the bare skin areas on show at the back as well. For the next step, we'll now be highlighting the hair and also any other brown areas across the miniature. And for this, we'll be using a 50-50 mix of Zombie Skin and also Leather Brown. Now, as you can see here, I'm just using my character brush here just to pick out the raised strands on the hair. I'll be doing the same on the other brown areas across the miniature as well. The next highlight we'll be painting on this miniature is to highlight for all of the black areas, and for this we'll be using Filthy Suit. Now this time around I'm using my detail brush. I'm just going to be very careful just to pick out the raised sections in the folds, all the black areas, which includes the glove here and also the pouch on the front, the shoes and also the satchel on the back as well. So once that highlight is completed, we can now start adding some gore to the miniature. Now for this, we'll be using Crusted Sore, and we'll be using this to create some dried blood effects across the miniature, focusing this around the mouth and also the hand as well. This time around I'm using my character brush, as I don't need to be quite as precise as previous steps. I'm just going to be painting this all around the mouth, all the areas where we'd expect blood to have accumulated on the zombie, like so. Now that the dried blood is completed, we can now work on some fresh blood, and for this we'll be using glistening blood, and we paint this over the areas that we've just painted with the Crusted Sore. Once again I'm using my character brush for this step, as I want to still be slightly precise, but I don't need to worry about being too in depth with the detail. Now the great thing about the glistening blood is it actually dries clear, which means that any areas that we paint on, it will actually dry shiny, and it will create almost like a fresh blood effect. So I'm just going to paint it over some of the areas such as around the mouth here, just leaving the Crusted Sore visible, and this will create some nice dried and wet blood effects. Now the final step for painting this miniature is an optional one, and this is to paint the eyes. Now for this I'll be using Bay Blonde, and I'll be painting very small dots just in the eyes there to reflect the glowing eyes. For this step I'm using my detail brush. I'm just going to be very carefully putting a small dot of the yellow just inside the eye like so, just to create a nice glowing eye effect. And here we have the completed miniature. Now, as I've already mentioned, this miniature has been painted in the same style as that's found on the Zombicide box art and also in the rulebook as well. Now, I will be painting the other zombies, such as the Runner, the Fatties, the Runner, the Walker and the Abomination, in similar colours as well. However, if you want to see different skin tones or different colour schemes, do let me know in the comments below. Also, if you enjoyed this tutorial and would like to see more, let me know, and also subscribe to be kept up to date with all of my future Zombicide Black Plague content. Now, if you want to support me in making more tutorials, you can do so by heading over to my Patreon page. From there, you can donate as little as $1 a month, and that'll just help keep me going in making more videos. So, until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye.